None of the content on this or any episode of the Kratom Science Podcast, Kratom Science Journal Club, or on any page of KratomScience.com is intended, nor should it be considered, medical claims or medical advice. This is the Kratom Science Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Gallagher, blog and social media writer for KratomScience.com, your source for all things Kratom. Okay, this is our Kratom News special. All the Kratom news and cannabis news. There's more of that always that we could find up until today, which is August 9th. And I'm joined by Kailee once again.
Yes, hello, I'm back.
So this first news item that we're going to do, the headline is Drug Policy Council Considers Kratom Ban. It's from the Florida Channel, dated July 22nd. 2022. The Florida Channel is I think it's like a public channel for the state of Florida. So this is their state drug policy council. And when I saw the headline, Drug Policy Council Considers Kratom Ban, it was a little scary, but once you get into the clips, it's a little less scary. I think it's only one council member that's doing this, but I'm going to play the video clip they have here.
Kratom is legal to sell in Florida. Legislative efforts to regulate it have been stymied in the past. The Florida Drug Policy Advisory Council is considering suggesting the governor and legislature create standards for distributing and selling kratom. But during a mid-July meeting, one council member suggested banning the substance altogether.
I know there was an FDLE report in 2021 that kratom deaths increased by 36% since 2020. I believe we would be saving lives. That's my thought.
The governor's drug czar, Doug Simon, said he wanted to think the recommendation through, but
I think banning would probably be the path of least resistance when it comes to any kind of enforcement or regulation. I mean, we have to, when you have maybe a teenager or somebody caught with kratom, what kind of penalties do they get? So if we just outright ban it, it'd be a little bit easier.
Jeffrey Cece with the Office of Substance Abuse at the Department of Children and Families was not convinced. Several years ago, the Federal Drug Enforcement Agency considered classifying the chemicals found in kratom as a controlled substance, meaning it would be considered easy to abuse and unsafe for medical use.
This is what happens in America. We do knee-jerk reactions to novel psychoactive components. They go straight to Schedule 1. If they're botanically based, we will miss out on decades of research into those compounds that might be yielding new therapeutic compounds, and that's just one of the trade-offs to America's prohibitionist drug system.
Dorothy Groover Skipper said, maybe we should ban it. There's another council member that said, maybe we should consider that because it would be easier than enforcement. Okay, this guy, Jeffrey Cece, he works at the Department of Children and Families, which is a really good department to be having this stance from because they're saying, it's going to protect kids. But he's saying, no, we can't just do this drug policy thing over again because he said, there might be therapeutic uses for it in the future, which is actually pretty relevant to the state of Florida because that's where the best pharmacological kratom research in the world is going on right now at the University of Florida.
Florida's Drug Policy Advisory Council in total reviewed 20 potential drug policies for their annual report. Cece, the vocal opponent to a kratom ban from DCF, said the ban doesn't fit in with other suggestions the group is considering.
We want a stigma reduction campaign, 2 recommendations ahead of this, but then we come here and we're pulling out the handcuffs again. We're pulling jail cells into the picture. We're talking about criminal records and mugshots. We're damaging relationships with employers, with family members. This is 1 step forward, 2 steps backwards. I want this council to be a little bit more coherent in its approach to creating criminal penalties, when we're also trying to be mindful of the unintended consequences of those criminal penalties.
The group moved forward without making a decision on whether to recommend making kratom illegal. The council meets again in October. For the Florida Channel, I'm Josie Barroso.
Yeah, this Jeffrey Cece, he is going to save, I think, kratom in Florida. He's making all the points that we've been making about. He's talking about, you're already getting out the handcuffs and trying to arrest people for using this substance rather than let's keep it legal so we can research it. And I also wish he would have brought up, maybe he did at that meeting. We didn't see the whole meeting. We just saw the clip. But hopefully he would bring up our state university, the University of Florida, is doing really good work on this substance, and it would totally hinder them for them to do a state ban because they have greenhouses they're growing that would have to be destroyed, and I think pretty much all their research would have to be, and they would have to get federal approval, I think, to study it, maybe, since there would be a state ban, or it would be all kinds of complicated. So it would be really bad for Florida to decide to try to ban Kratom.
The only thing that I even really noted about this was I really appreciate how he actually stood up and was basically talking about how hypocritical everyone was being. It's like, hey, if you're wanting to make the situation better, why are you trying to take the easy route?
It seems like they actually said, here's what we're going to do about drugs. I mean, Florida has a drug problem. I mean, it's a very entertaining drug problem that we can see on clips. It's always somebody in Florida. It's acting crazy. But actually, I mean, it's not funny, but it is kind of funny. But yeah, they're trying to do a different approach. Like, banning it is not, it's going to make it more dangerous. That wasn't in the report, but he might have also made that point. There's already a fentanyl and people trying to buy illegal cocaine. It happened to a friend of mine. I didn't know him personally, but he got what he thought he was buying cocaine, and it was fentanyl, and he overdosed and died. He wasn't, a big drug guy. He just felt like doing cocaine that night. And with Kratom, it's like these things are mild. People will take 8 or 10 pills and be like a moderate dose, and if it's full of fentanyl and they buy it illegally and they take 8 and 10 pills, and it'd be really dangerous. So
like, even though there's not like actually any regulation for Kratom right now, it's still in general safer because you can get it from like vendors in Indonesia, and we have the ability to test the products here ourselves. And
if there's if there's like a dangerous batch that's a bunch of people get a bad reaction from it, it could be traced. I wish they would do it more so. If it's underground, it's just going to be harder to trace. It's going to be more hidden. It's called iron law of drug prohibition, which is the more they're prohibited, the stronger they get because they're easier to hide, which is why they're making moonshine whiskey instead of beer during prohibition, because a bottle of whiskey is the same amount of alcohol in it as a case of beer. It's easier to hide. So same thing with any drug that becomes illegal, and I think it would just be pretty obvious that Kratom would be filled with fentanyl and all kinds of other stuff. Yeah, this next one's pretty interesting. It's one of the news. It's just like a regular WINK news. It's out of Florida. The headline is, Kids Jump from Moving Car in Cape Coral. Man driving found unconscious. Do you want to read the thing I put in quotes there?
Yeah, sure. A Lehigh Acres man is facing DUI and child neglect charges after Cape Coral police say 2 kids jumped out of his car. He was later found unconscious. Police say they responded after receiving a report that a man had driven his vehicle off the road and 2 kids were seen jumping out. According to police, Negrin remained unconscious until medics arrived and gave him Narcan. He was taken to the emergency room, and on the way, police say medics found a needle in a pocket in his shorts. Officers questioned Negrin at the hospital and say he told them he was ashamed of what had happened and admitted to using Kratom. It's unknown if or what other drugs may have been involved.
And thank you, Matt Seaver, the writer, for putting that last line. Although the next paragraph, which I didn't include because it's something our listeners should all know, it just says, the National Institutes of Health say Kratom is blah, 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 similar to opioids. So he made the story about Kratom. However, they found a needle in the guy's pants. Why would he's already in enough trouble for almost killing 2 kids in his car. So why would he admit to using an illegal drug? So I assume I don't know if there was a blood test. I'm sure if they want to prosecute the guy, which I think they do, he's DUI, child neglect charges, and a couple other charges. They should actually blood test him. I don't know what else he was taking. The Kratom might not have helped, but that's just the go-to thing. If you're taking illegal drugs, nobody knows what Kratom is. You can say, oh, I took Kratom. The guy, I think he just made a mistake and he was ashamed. He might not even be a bad guy. I mean, I purposely didn't want to put his name in the thing, and he probably just made a mistake, a really bad one, and...
Yeah.
Like, the car was moving, he was asleep, and 2 kids in the back had to jump out of the car. So that's really bad. That's really terrible. If Kratom contributed to it, please don't mix Kratom with other drugs. I don't know if it did or not.
What I wanted to mention was, like, where he, instead of just saying what the needle could have been for, he just flat out blamed Kratom as if that was the main thing and as if you can inject it.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if maybe he was just completely misinformed. So what he was taking, maybe someone told him he was taking someone else, because ketamine can actually be injected and has very similar effects to Kratom and opioids and stuff.
Okay.
So I'm wondering if maybe it was either that or he just said the first thing that came to mind whenever he was questioned because he was scared.
This came out July 20th. This is from WINK News. And I just wonder if there's a follow-up on this. Just wanted to break in here and say there actually was a follow-up. The same source, Wink News, showed body cam footage, added information there that was relevant to what we're talking about, as he also admitted to taking Valium to the police. That wasn't in the original story. If they have a needle, they can test that for other substances. They could give him a blood test based on, the fact that he was unconscious. I just ran it because I'm doing an article about Kratom during pregnancy. There's at least one case, there might have been a couple that I saw, but where the woman admits to doing Kratom because the baby's getting these withdrawal symptoms. But a baby could still have withdrawal symptoms and opioids not show up in the mother's blood. But the difference is Child Protective Services can come take the baby if you're doing something illegal. But if you're doing something legal, like Kratom, they can't take your baby. So there would be a total incentive to lie, and that's the bad thing about our drug policy is he has a reason to blame it on Kratom. And a lot of these even case reports of these bad reactions to Kratom, the doctors will just ask them what they took. The people will say Kratom, and they could have been taking anything because they didn't. Yeah. Most of the time they'll test them. They'll drug test them. However, they could have been taking a whole bunch of opioids up until a few days before, and they could have been totally flushed out of their system. Yeah. And they just had Kratom for the withdrawals, and then that could have totally led to whatever problem they're having.
Just escalated it even further from there, especially if they don't know what they're doing with it.
Yeah.
It could cause a slew of other issues for them.
This is a big one. It's bill introduced to federally legalize cannabis in the USA. This is from my article on kratomscience.com from July 27th, 2022. I had this brilliant idea of directing people to the website, actually. That's probably a pretty good idea. I don't know.
Yeah. Especially if you have since you have on here where you got all of your information too,
I'll read it. I whittled it down. On July 21st, 2022, Senator Cory Booker, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, and Senate Finance Committee Chair Ron Wyden introduced the Cannabis Administration and Opportunity Act, which will decriminalize and deschedule cannabis to provide for reinvestment in certain persons adversely impacted by the war on drugs, to provide for expungement of certain cannabis expenses. In case you didn't realize it, the last part of that quote was a quote from the bill, and I didn't write that. I should have said, according to an ACLU report, of the 8.2 million marijuana arrests between 2001 and 2010, 88% were simply for having marijuana. Nationwide, the arrest data revealed one consistent trend: significant racial bias, and that was a quote from the ACLU report. Several national polls show the majority of Americans are in favor of legalizing cannabis on the federal level. Latest poll from the time I wrote that was from The Economist /YouGov.com, resulting in 58% of Americans and even half of Republicans, I wanted to point that out, answering yes, it should be legal to the question, do you think that the use of marijuana should be made legal in the United States or not? Latest Gallup and Rasmussen polls found support for national legalization at 68% and 62% respectively. So that's way more. Like, when you get 2/3 up into those numbers, that should be enough. That's enough to pass the Senate as a law, and even if that much of the population doesn't support it, it's even if the Senate support it, they pass plenty of stuff that the population doesn't support. So this should really go through, and I hope it's not shot down for whatever political reason, because I think the Democrat, it's their bill, but I think they could, enough Republican constituents could pressure their representatives to do this, because everybody wants a nonpartisan cooperation so we could get things passed. This is a perfect thing to do, because most people on both sides want this passed, and it's frustrating that it hasn't been. The fact they still act like it's something that's still as harmful or dangerous as any other thing is really ridiculous. It's legal in 38 states now. I have a medical,
at least medically.
Yeah. In Pennsylvania, it's medical, and it's easy for anybody to get a medical card. You basically just have to pay for it. It's basically legal for me to buy weed in Pennsylvania. I just have to go through a doctor who's like, how's it working out for you? Good. All right. You're approved for another year. Yeah. All right, doc, here's $150.
Yeah, that's the only thing about it is it is a little expensive. But I mean, I would say it's ultimately worth it, because you're not feeding yourself all of these chemicals that actually could be detrimental to your brain, to your body. So I would say if you believe that way, especially if you're more of like a down to earth kind of person, I guess I could say you would see it more as worth it.
I don't know. People just shouldn't be arrested for it. It's something that's... No. It's just something that's as normal as beer for a lot of Americans, and it has been for decades. So it's about time. It's about time this gets passed. And if Republicans want to add something onto it that makes it look like a win for them, do that. Whatever. Just let's get it done. So
the article that I had, the Marijuana Moment article that I had posted in the last setup that we had here about it actually went into a lot of depth about the actual, they had posted some of the quotes by Cory Booker, and he was talking about how he's not entirely sure if this as a whole is going to get pushed, because he does, even though he does have a lot of support all around him, even from the Republicans, well, some of the Republicans, I guess I should say, but he is fairly certain that he will get something passed. Something, even if it's just a tiny step forward, it's going to be a step forward.
Yeah. Yeah, hopefully it would be national decriminalization. So if you get caught with it on a plane, then you'll get fined a couple $100 and not be arrested, because that's the only federal thing that keeps people, and you should be able to possess it in every state. In states it's legal, of course, it's legal, but in states where it's not, even Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, before it was even medically legal here, they decided to decriminalize. Yeah, decriminalization. So if you get caught with it, it's like a fine. It's like a traffic ticket. And I just realized this is your note, and I was reading from your notes.
It's okay. You agreed with me, so I mean, it worked.
Yeah, I'm like, I wrote this, right? Nah, I'm taking credit. All right, sorry about that.
It's okay.
The next one is the big weed story is Brittney Griner, WNBA basketball player who got arrested in Russia. She had 0.7 grams of cannabis oil on her. She was just sentenced to 9 years in Russian prison, which is insane. But it's also I'm all over the place with a story, but I actually posted, because Dr. Carl Hart, who I respect a lot, he's he writes about drugs and drug use. He posted the Onion article, which is, if nobody knows what the Onion is, it's like a satire newspaper. Satire means it's fake news on purpose to be funny. So if we do read this, we just want people to know that Biden didn't actually say these things. But the headline is Biden, U.S. won't rest until Brittney Griner returned home to serve marijuana possession sentence. So it's like assuring the public that he intended to make the diplomatic situation his top priority. President Biden told reporters Thursday that the United States won't rest until WNBA star Brittney Griner was returned home to serve a marijuana possession sentence. I hate to read this because I know people are going to listen to it and say, he said that?
Yeah, and someone will take it out of context
yes.
and just use this particular section.
But the whole point is there's people doing sentences in the United States for marijuana. There was actually another guy, and it's also, and I just wanted to preface everything we talk about the story of that because there's like another guy also that's not in the WNBA who got 14 years in prison. The one thing I found was, it was a tweet, but I actually just checked on it like 5 minutes before we started talking about it. According to Russian laws, this is from a journal article called the Harm Reduction Journal. According to Russian laws, for acts not involving sale, the amount of the substance involved in the act is the sole detriment of whether the perpetrator is criminally prosecuted or is subject only to administrative punishment in the form of a fine of up to 1,000 rubles or 15 days of detention. So she clearly wasn't selling it. According to Article 228 of the Criminal Code, this is Russian law, violations not involving the sale of narcotics are a crime only if they involve a large amount. They said up to 6 grams of weed, and she had nowhere near that much, is punishable by a detention of 15 days. And she was caught with 0.7 grams, is facing 9 years, was sentenced to 9 years in prison, which to me, that's a political issue. It's because there's a war going on with Ukraine. She's being used as a pawn in a prisoner of war. I know if you can't do the crime, don't do the time. Her defense is that she was rush packing. I don't know if she thought she'd get away with it or what.
Yeah.
But I know, like, I keep my vape pen in my book bag, and sometimes I bring the book bag when I'm going on an airplane, and I might forget that one time. So that might have very well happened. I mean, she's super pressured to be going over to a foreign country and play. So she could have very well be telling the truth, but that's probably her best defense, even if she isn't being entirely truthful. Still, it's way out of line, even for Russian law.
Yeah, and because of how, like, ridiculous the situation truly is, I feel like it's hard to not look at it as a political thing. If they won't even get their own people for, they will just give them 15 days of detention for 6 grams, and they're trying to give her 9 years for, like, significantly less for that. How can you not say it's something like that? I mean, we are allies with Ukraine. We are literally providing humanitarian aid for them and stuff right now. And
probably weapons, but yeah.
Yes. Maybe under the table, but that's beside the point.
Yeah.
It's just, it doesn't make sense. That's the only thing that even potentially makes sense. And even if that's not the case, like, why not want to bring her back over here to make sure that she's safe? Because they're literally in war. She could die in a Russian prison for having less than a gram of cannabis oil.
Definitely not just at all. I mean, maybe she served 15 days or a month or something. That's just not. I don't know how anybody could just write that off as if you don't do the crime, don't do the time. That's a little more complicated than that. And plus, she's an American. Shouldn't you want her to be free on any circumstances? The one point that I read, and I just read this right before we started recording, was from the National Review. It was an article that said the trade-off is this guy named Victor Boot, who was basically a terrorist. He sold weapons to Al-Qaeda, and he might be the negotiating trade-off to give him back to Russia and that would maybe endanger Americans down the line. Which, all right, maybe pick somebody else, whatever. But, we got to do everything we can to free an American. It's not just you went over to another country, broke their laws, and you're in prison situation. it's a professional athlete too. I mean, I don't know. And there's this other guy, High Times Magazine. I'll put all these links in the description, but he was just a regular guy in Russia, and he on purpose brought a bunch of weed over there. Don't bring weed to Russia. Nobody.
Yeah.
Well, okay, that's obvious. Okay,
Especially
she made a
if you're
mistake.
American.
I wish they should have, especially with all the war and political tensions, I wish the coach or somebody would have just searched all their bags. Even though that might be a little unethical by itself, but seriously, try to, make sure you don't have any weed on you.
Well, I mean, that's the whole point in, I guess this necessarily is not the whole point in TSA, but, that kind of lends you to think that they do not get checked by TSA or something like that, because that totally should have been caught before she even made it out of the United States.
Or it just at least, get them all at the airport, say, are you sure? Russia doesn't play around. I even wanted to just plug this article on kratomscience.eu because on kratomscience.eu, there's all kinds of, if you want to look up in general drug policies and then specifically kratom policies in Russia, Russia is terrible with drugs. Here's what Andre wrote. He wrote this great thing, and he put this caveat about how, the United States isn't great either. He goes, the Russian Federation is extremely corrupt, unequal, and authoritarian, where a few oil oligarchs have a voice as long as they are aligned with the president. Political opposition is heavily fought and persecuted, with extreme cases of assassinations, imprisonment, and confinement camps in Siberia, and destruction of public life. However, the Western public opinion of Russia as the villains of history is not a reasonable approach, for just as the United States has bombed territories for its economic and geopolitical interests, Russia defends what is in its interests by other means. Yeah, don't bring drugs to Russia. The other point I had to highlight here is they are notoriously LBTGQ. I gotta get that right. I'm trying to be polite. But they have just codified anti-gay policies. People freak out if a trans woman reads a kid's story to a group of kids, and they have that codified into law that they'll be imprisoned if that ever happens over there. So I don't know exactly how Brittney Griner identifies, but she's married to a woman. It's kind of like a perfect storm of political nonsense that's going on over there and between our two countries. So, but there was this thing that just came out, and I'm going to play it. New hope for Brittney Griner.
Tonight there is new hope for a prisoner exchange. Russia is signaling it's ready to discuss a swap for detained WNBA star Brittney Griner and former Marine Paul Whelan. Former UN Ambassador Bill Richardson says any deal would likely be a 2-for-2, 2 detained Americans for 2 imprisoned Russians. Here's ABC's Mola Lengi.
Tonight, a former U.S. ambassador to the UN helping to bring home Brittney Griner says he believes the WNBA star will be released. Bill Richardson telling our George Stephanopoulos today.
I'm optimistic. I think she's going to be freed.
Richardson now working as an outside advisor in negotiations for Griner as well as other detainees, including former Marine Paul Whelan.
There's going to be a prisoner swap, though, and I think it'll be 2-for-2, involving Paul Whelan.
After Griner was convicted and sentenced, Russia's foreign minister Sergei Lavrov signaled on Friday that Russia was prepared to talk. The Biden administration now urging Russia to accept its prisoner proposal, which sources tell ABC News is to swap Griner and Whelan for notorious Russian arms dealer Viktor Bout. Last week, the WNBA star was sentenced to 9 years after a Russian judge said Griner had criminal intent when vape cartridges containing cannabis oil were found in her luggage in February. Griner has insisted it was a mistake.
I never meant to break any laws here.
Well, as these negotiations are going on, Griner's legal team is working on an appeal to her sentence. That could take months and would ultimately be withdrawn, Lindsay, if this prisoner swap is successful.
Renewed optimism on that front at this point. Mola, thank you.
We're going to sound that professional in a couple more episodes. It's looking up in that situation. Depending on your perspective. I think
Yeah, it really sucks that it seems like this has to be the route. Like, I really wish that there was some other way that they could do this, because he's literally like helping them kill Americans. Victor Boot, is that how you pronounce his last name?
Yeah.
So like that's really unfortunate. But I understand that, like, this, this is war essentially, and you have to make tough decisions like that, especially if you want to protect a pretty much, she's pretty much innocent, completely innocent, being held there against her will.
And, there's a lot of other guys out there like him too, anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they probably got him and then another guy just took its place.
Okay, so the next article we have here is headlined, Highly Potent Weed Creating Marijuana Addicts Worldwide, study says. And guess what? It's from CNN. Should we be surprised? It was published July 25th, 2022. I will go ahead and get started with the little section here. It does sound completely ridiculous. Higher concentrations of THC, the part of the marijuana plant that makes you high, are causing more people to become addicted in many parts of the world, a new review of studies found. In the United States, about 3 in 10 people who use marijuana have cannabis use disorder, the medical term for marijuana addiction, according to the U.S. Centers for Disease and Prevention. The European Monitoring Center for Drugs and Drug Addiction found a 76% rise in people entering treatment for cannabis addiction over the past decade. Quote, while cannabis potency continued to rise during the same time, Freeman said. And I just want to stop here real quick. That whole thing just sounds so stupid, at least to me, because that's literally the case with anything. As the potency of anything increases, you're going to develop more of a tolerance.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like comparing it with alcohol. You drink, say, something that's like 50% alcohol, it's, pretty consistently, it's going to be hard for you to just drink a beer and feel it, So, like, I feel like that section just sounded so stupid. Anyway, on to the next thing that we have here, which is specifically from the study that this CNN article is referencing. It says of the 4,171 articles screened, 20 met the eligibility criteria. 8 studies focused on psychosis, 8 on anxiety, 7 on depression, and 6 on CUD. Overall, use of higher potency cannabis relative to lower potency cannabis was associated with an increased risk of psychosis and CUD. Evidence varied for depression and anxiety. The association of cannabis potency with CUD and psychosis highlights its relevance in healthcare settings and for public health guidelines and policies on cannabis sales. Standardization of exposure measures and longitudinal designs are needed to strengthen the evidence of this association.
The headline saying is strong weeds causing a wave of addiction across the world. This study is associations. There might be an association between higher potency and cannabis use disorder. It's a common problem with news stories about science. They kind of take the most, especially CNN. I mean, I'm glad you pointed that out. Because CNN's like entertainment. Everything on cable is entertainment news. There's usually, for most people, there's one you agree with more and one you think is all total BS. People who already have mental health issues sometimes turn to cannabis, and it's not necessarily the drug causing the disorders with drug use already or the mental health disorders. This is a review of articles, and these articles were mostly case reports of people probably coming in and saying, I smoke a whole bunch of weed and it's probably not good for me. I haven't found my car keys in like 8 days. I've been there like that, even though the case reports are from people going to the doctor and saying, I have a problem. So right away, there's not people going into a doctor's office, or probably none of these people would have gone into an ER, maybe, if they had a high-potency edible and got scared. We talked about this with Kratom before on the Journal Club. It's like these things are already skewed to be negative. So they're basically just basing it on people who have the problems. On the other hand, I think there is something to this, because they took 4,171 articles and they only picked 20, so that's pretty good. Maybe they threw out all the ones where the people were already predisposed to a negative thing. And I mean, I've known people that smoke too much weed. I've had at one point in my life, I just decided, I'm sick of this, I'm done. Like, it wasn't like a big, I didn't have to go to a rehab or anything. Yeah, but the whole thing with higher potency is, like, my dad likes to drink whiskey Manhattans, but he's never done it every night. He might do it weekends or one day a month, or maybe more weekends in the summer. And he's barely ever been drunk in front of us on holidays. Something. I mean, he's Irish, so the bar is higher. But it's like the potency of his thing of choice doesn't matter. It doesn't make me, like, the potency of the weed that we buy now legally is just making it last way, way longer for me. We used to get this stuff with seeds in it, and it was yucky, and it just, like, mostly gave you a headache. You had to smoke a whole damn joint, and you would just smoke more of it, and it was worse for you because there's more crap going into your lungs that wasn't beneficial stuff. When you do headlines like this, it just makes it seem like a fact to somebody who doesn't really have time to look closely at it.
Yeah, and that's a big problem right now. Like, a lot of times people don't actually sit down and read the articles, and they're like, most of the time they have really, like, severely misleading headlines. It really messes with the way people view everything just in general. It can make someone, believe really radically about something when it's just completely unnecessary. And
scientists will tell you, like, the first scientist I interviewed for this podcast, Mark Swager, and one of my questions was, do scientists get frustrated? He's like, yes. He, like, almost said yes in the middle of the question before I was done answering it. I used to listen to this science podcast called, still do sometimes, called The Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, but they would always talk about how the headlines are so different from the actual science that you can't just apply the most sensational thing to science and expect to be a good reporter about science. But at the same time, there might be something because, I mean, there's a lot of people maybe going for help that are represented in all these articles that were screened. So there might be something to it. I'm gonna look at the evidence and not just be an advocate for weed is safe all the time for everybody. Because I can know a lot of people, and there's a couple people I'm thinking in particular that started actually later in life, and they just kind of became different, and their their wife and kids didn't expect it, and I didn't care. But then I was like, even I was like, where's the old person that I used to know? He's a little different now because he smokes weed all the time. You can't say just because it's not as bad as alcohol that there's going to be no problems ever.
Yeah, I just recently did a little clip from episode 79 with Morgan Godwin, and in that you talk about something like that, how not everything's black and white. There are pros and cons to literally everything. Yeah, weed has really good potential. It could help, be extremely helpful and is ultimately better for you than some of the other stuffs they would prescribe for, your anxiety, depression, pain, stuff like that. But it's also really important to note that it can be detrimental to you, depending on how you are as a person. Like, it could be hard on your brain. Like, it can make you anxious, like make you start thinking things, a little out there. It
definitely makes me anxious sometimes. Yep.
And it also just has addiction potential. Like, your body could become physically reliant on it. Like, I know someone very extremely close to me who has to smoke every single day, or he can't eat, he can't sleep. And I think that's very important to look at.
That would probably be more of a dependency, I would say, because it's got dependencies more towards the physical thing. Just actually, all these things are complex for everybody. So addiction means, like, if this is a negative outcome, which it might be, if you have to spend all this money on weed just to sleep, then you actually yourself might consider that an addiction, which an addiction by NIDA is defined as having negative outcomes. But it's all kind of complex. But but a
not-
dependency would be you need it for some kind of physical outcome, and if you don't have it, you get a withdrawal. It's tolerance and withdrawal. It's people that don't smoke any weed and only drink a couple of drinks a week, even though alcohol is in general, we consider that a more dangerous drug. They're actually better off doing alcohol than the person is smoking too much weed. The dose makes the poison. You'd learn that in a Toxicology 101 course. But anyway, on to the last and final thingy, news item. I'm almost as good as those CNN reporters. Let's call it, it's not a thingy, it's a news item. So this one was cool. The headline is DEA sued again over refusal to allow psilocybin access for patients despite federal law. This is from Marijuana Moment, and it's July 22nd, 2022. The Drug Enforcement Administration is being sued again over its refusal to allow a doctor to treat terminally ill patients with psilocybin therapy pursuant to federal and state right to try laws, which are aimed at expanding access to Schedule I investigational drugs that aren't currently approved for general use. So I don't know much about these laws. It's kind of complicated. Kratom isn't Schedule I, so it wouldn't fall under that. The latest litigation is a follow-up to an earlier lawsuit that was heard before the U.S. Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which ultimately rejected the case in February on procedural grounds. In essence, the federal court ruled that they could not reach the merits of the challenge because DEA hadn't made clear that its denial constituted a final rule that would be appealed. Following that decision, the plaintiffs repeatedly sought clarification from the DEA on whether its decision was final. The agency declined to respond to those written requests, so attorneys informed DEA that they would give officials until this week to reply, after which point they would consider the decision final and submit another lawsuit. Quote, in denying petitioners' requested accommodation in the final agency action, DEA hides behind a smokescreen, neglecting its duty to implement the federal RTT, right to try, and violating the state right to try, the complaint says. It is attempting to use Controlled Substances Act as a cudgel to thwart state medical practice to the detriment of dying patients. So, I'll break this down here. Now, okay, so right to try laws, I guess there are federal and state. I really don't know much about this, but it's essentially the right to try Schedule I drugs for dying people only. We went over in the podcast the other week, the documentary How to Change Your Mind, and it was a lot of people this one lady was in her 70s, had cancer, and did some psilocybin, and it just made her more at peace with dying, and that's basically what it would do to folks who are dying. It wouldn't cure them or anything. So now there's all kinds of psilocybin futures trading on Wall Street, psychedelic futures trading, which somebody brought up to me like last year or something on Twitter, and I'm like, what? And they're like, yeah, even though it's still federally legal, it's like they're already trading it, so there's tons of money in it for lawyers and litigation and stuff. Just kind of like Kratom has enough money for lobbyists, so it can remain legal. But the DEA is kind of like, they gave them a decision, they left it in a gray area up to the courts, and I said that's sort of like the FDA refusing to regulate Kratom, and it keeps it in a gray area. The article also mentions the DEA was trying to quietly outlaw newly synthesized psychedelics, and I'll read from the article. Additionally, the DEA recently announced that it's taking the rare step of holding a hearing on its controversial proposal to place the 5 psychedelic compounds in Schedule I of the Controlled Substances Act. This is actually good that they're doing it, their own internal hearing, even if it doesn't change their policy. It just shows this is the second time. Okay, the agency first proposed scheduling the tryptamines. I'm not even going to read the letters. There's 5 new tryptamines that I guess were synthesized, so technically they're not illegal.
Yeah, and it looks like some of them might have been made off of like Molly or something like that. 'Cause
Yes.
I'm pretty sure that's what
They're all
MEO
similar.
is.
Yeah. And it faced significant pushback from the research and advocacy communities, receiving nearly 600 messages during a public comment period, most opposing the rule and requesting hearings. So they're going to do the hearing. And yeah, I left a comment on that because I heard from Hamilton Morris tweeted about it, and Soren Shade, who I've had on the podcast, who produces Hamilton, his podcast, even told me about it. These things should be open for research because even one of these only causes hearing distortions or hallucinations, which no other psychedelic has ever done, which could do something that I have is tinnitus from just being in loud bands. I have like a ee in my ear all the time.
Yeah, me too.
Do you? Okay.
Yeah, I have tinnitus too.
It's from Roger Waters. Is that what it's from? Yeah.
No, I've had it for a while. Actually, I think it's related to blood pressure, but that's beside the point.
Mine could be too. I don't care. But that one psychedelic that only affects auditory hallucinations might be, because nobody knows what tinnitus is. It might be a hallucination. In the future, it might be good for treating tinnitus, which never had a treatment before.
Yeah, no, you're just kind of stuck with it.
Yeah, I'm used to it, but it's like, yeah, I wish I didn't have it.
Yeah, I didn't have to like constantly hear whether it's a very high, because mine changes. I don't know, like about you. Mine changes like the pitch and the frequency a lot. So I either will maybe just hear like static sound, like a room tone kind of deal, basically, or it's a very high pitched ring. And
I get the beeps. I got a beep last night. Hamilton even made the point in a tweet. He said, just like with Kratom, this is the second time the DEA they wanted to schedule something, put something, outlaw it, and they reversed their decision. So that's a good thing, and now they're going to have a hearing. So that's actually a good thing that DEA wants to, focus on at least, I mean, they still want some drugs to be illegal, obviously, because if they are all legal, then there wouldn't be any use for the DEA. The political pressure's getting to them, basically, and they want to... they probably want to focus on illegal fentanyl and the stuff that's, actually more dangerous. People. Yeah.
Like you were saying with the about the one for hearing, just in general, all of these could be extremely useful because, his name's escaping me, but the guy who created LSD, he made it to treat ADHD. And when if you microdose LSD, it can, treat treat ADHD pretty effectively, according to his research and stuff. So I think if they actually tried to do something with these and, research them to make them potentially helpful to people who are genuinely suffering in some way, shape, or form, even if it's not completely drastic, it could still be helpful. And it's very good that the DEA may be recognizing that. Even if it's not specifically from political pressure because the general public wants it or whatever, it still has potential.
And I think we're in that space where this is going to happen because it's never been this mainstream ever in my lifetime that we would consider psychedelics for therapy. And this Michael Pollan documentary be out on Netflix and people be more aware of it now than ever.
In Colorado, trying to legalize psilocybin also.
Yeah, is that that's the whole state, right?
Yeah, the entire state. I can't remember exactly if they're shooting for recreation. I want to say that maybe their ultimate goal, just because of the way they took care of cannabis in general. But I do know they're at least looking at it medically, and I can't remember if they've made any progress with that too recently. I haven't seen anything about it. But I do know that has been on the table.
Yeah, I want to say New York State or somewhere is looking into decriminalizing it. Cory Booker again. Oregon's decriminalized all drugs. So every drug in Oregon, it's not illegal to sell anything, but if you possess up to a certain amount, you get a fine or something like that. In Oregon, it's all drugs in Oregon.
Yeah.
To convince the people that are afraid of these things, because my parents were so freaking afraid when I was going to Grateful Dead shows that I would end up at Psycho, and convincing, my parents are now listen to me and they're like, okay, I'll get some of that CBD, or at least. This is what they were trying to do with this stuff back before everybody freaked out about it. Banning stuff, whether it's kratom, marijuana, psychedelics, is just going to increase the harms, and studying it, keeping it legal to study. Oh my God, if we could ever do this, actually making sane policy around these things so people could have them and not hurt themselves or not take too much, and talk to a doctor about it, or a trained person at least whenever they need to, be better.
Yeah, and like there are countries that where they have literally all drugs are legalized, and in general they have a much smaller percentage of drug problems throughout their population. There are less people dying of overdoses and stuff. So I think even if we just move to a decriminalization for all things, I completely understand not wanting to, lose your entire association. Obviously, you do need to have some sort of control, just because people are insane. For lack of a better term, just to put it simply, people are insane.
And going back to what Morgan Godwin said is I don't want billboards for heroin like there are for alcohol. I don't think we don't even need the billboards for alcohol. I think everybody who wants to drink something knows where to go, what to get. We don't need we don't need commercials. It would be really careful and complex, but hopefully we could get enough people making policy that have more than their next donation on their mind. They have the actual good of the people on their mind. And I think I could say that in a nonpartisan way. I think everybody would agree with that. We got to make drug policy that helps as many people and reduces as much harm.
Yeah, because right now we are just surrounded. There's so many problems right now. It's with the opioid crisis and everything. And it's largely because people don't want to speak up. They're scared to talk about it. And it's all because of the way, the stigma around it, and the way oftentimes these situations are handled. Someone's trying to seek help and they get jailed because they, admitted to having these illegal drugs.
And you can't learn about kratom through the media. I mean, we've proven that 2 weeks in a row, 2 episodes in a row, I think.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kailee. We'll be coming to you next month for another episode of Kratom News. All the links that we referred to are in the description. Please like, subscribe, share, rate, review. Check us out on Twitter at Kratom Science and on Facebook. The music is Risey. The song is Memories of Thailand. The Kratom Science podcast is written and produced by me, Brian Gallagher, for KratomScience.com. Take care.